Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think that we can start because we have two important dense panels ahead of us. So let's not waste the time. So, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's conference dedicated to EU support for Ukraine. It will be for us opportunity to discuss lessons learned, but also the main challenges on the way ahead. We are now in over 2 years into Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. 2 years of suffering and destruction, but also 2 years of heroic resistance by Ukraine. So let me pay a tribute to brave Ukrainian armed forces who are fighting with prevailing forces of Russia. The EU has and will continue supporting Ukraine with unprecedented scale. The 50 billion euro Ukraine facility has recently come into force, and the first package of 6 billion euro will be made available immediately. On Monday's FAC, member states will finally agree on the Ukraine Assistance Fund. Additional 5 billion euro to increase the budget of European Peace Facility for the Ukrainian armed forces. Last week, we welcomed the first ever EU defense industrial strategy, designed not only to support European defense industrial readiness, but also to strengthen links between the European and Ukrainian defense technological and industrial bases. A defense innovation office will be opened in Kiev to create a bridge between innovative EU startups and Ukrainian companies and its armed forces. And last but not least, it is worth mentioning also the current works on strengthening the EU civilian advisory mission in Ukraine, the only EU actor which is present in Ukraine, not only in the capital, but also in the regions. Poland has not only provided bilateral support to Ukraine, but also encouraged full commitment from our European and transatlantic partners to help Ukraine prevail. And recently, my Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, the President of the Republic of Poland were in Washington, and the main topic of the discussion was obviously support for Ukraine. And to quote Prime Minister Donald Tusk, Poland is the most reliable, most stable ally of Ukraine, and there is nothing more important than supporting Ukraine's efforts against the Russian attack. This is reflected not only in the volume of Polish humanitarian and economic aid to Ukraine, which exceeds 1 billion euro, and in support for Ukrainian refugees, which now exceeds 4 billion euro, but also in Poland's role as an important hub for the distribution of aid from Europe and other world partners. Poland is also one of the leaders in military support to Ukraine. Our assistance in arms and military equipment has exceeded 3.5 billion euro by the end of 2023, and more will come. In January, Prime Minister Tusk announced a new military package, including a loan for arms purchases and a commitment to joint production. We will also join the Czech initiative to provide Ukraine with necessary ammunition as soon as possible. And finally, as host of the Combined Arms Training Center of the EU-MAN mission to Ukraine, Poland is putting a lot of efforts into training of Ukrainian soldiers. To date, the EU trained more than 40,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and more than 10,000 of them have been trained in Poland. The EU and its member states must keep up the pace in addressing Ukraine's pressing military and defense needs. And we need both bilateral effort and multilateral effort. It is also the task for us, for all of us today, to urge the entire free world to be resolute in defending the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Poland also strongly supports Ukraine's accession process, and Ukraine has made impressive progress on reforms despite Russia's aggression, and now the EU must deliver on its part by opening accession talks. We hope that the negotiating framework will be adopted as soon as possible, and that the first intergovernmental conference will take place still during the Belgian presidency of the Council of the European Union. So today's discussions will provide us with a chance to look at the most pressing needs of Ukraine and the role of the EU in rebuilding Ukraine and to make it a more resilient European country. So without further ado, let me thank to the Polish Institute of International Affairs for co-hosting this event. Let me thank to all our panelists who accepted our invitation. And let's start our discussions. We have a great panelist, so please ask them good questions. Let's make this event as much productive as possible. But before we will move to the panel part, I would kindly ask our colleague Ms. Oksana Diakun, Deputy Head of Ukrainian Mission to the EU, to say us a few words from the Ukrainian perspective. So, Oksana, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador Stadejek. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the Polish permanent representation of the EU for the initiative to hold this event. And it is an honor for me to be here today and contribute to this discussion that I'm sure will be very interesting on a matter which is on a topic which is a matter of my daily concern here in Brussels, but I'm also sure that it is a matter of your daily concern here in Brussels, because many of you, I'm sure, are working on Ukraine. So back in February 2022, when the world watched in horror as thousands of Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine and the Russian missiles bombed our cities, the Ukrainian people defied all odds. Nobody expected that Ukraine would survive and would stand for so long. The aggressor didn't expect that the resolve of Ukrainian people would be able to stop his army. The aggressor didn't expect that Europe and the free world would stand united behind Ukraine. Ukraine's successes in pushing back the aggressor would be hardly possible without consolidated support of partners in Europe and beyond. Poland's role and leadership in these efforts were exemplary. And at the time when Ukraine needed it most, Poland held our back. And the whole Polish society showed an outstanding example of solidarity. Overall, Russian invasion of Ukraine has shown us all the value of acts and choices, individual and collective ones, that we make our day in the face of historic challenges. Ukrainian people choose to fight and to defend their land and freedom. So I think we can ask ourselves now, where do we stand 2 years after the beginning of full-scale invasion? The Ukrainian armed forces have liberated half of occupied land and exposed multiple weaknesses of Russian army. Ukraine has destroyed and disabled more than 33% of Russian Black Sea fleet. We limited Russia's dominance in the Black Sea, ensured the safety of the navigation corridor in the Black Sea, and renewed the pre-2022 level of maritime exports. We thwarted Russian assaults on multiple fronts, secured a bridgehead on the left bank of Dnipro River. Russian losses at the front line are 7-8 times higher than the Ukrainian ones. Just in the last 1 month and a half, we destroyed 15 military Russian aircraft. We are also able to target Russia's military facilities deep into the Russian territory. All this with resources that remain very limited in comparison with Russia's military capabilities. So our experience, our lesson learned in countering Russia clearly shows Russia can be defeated and Ukraine can prevail. But to achieve this, we need sustainable and efficient military support from our partners. At this point, we believe that all restrictions that hinder the possibility to defeat Russia must be rejected. We are facing the enemy, not only Ukraine, but Europe as well, which is conducting a genocidal war in Europe now in 21st century. An enemy which revisionist policies pose an existential threat to Europe. And countries like Poland know it very well from its own experience. So we highly appreciate all military assistance which has been provided already to Ukraine by EU collectively and its member states, but still more has to be done. And also the volume and the speed of military deliveries are critically important. And we have shown that in recent weeks after what happened in Avdiivka. Lacks of artillery shells remains a huge problem for our armed forces. The disparity with Russia in terms of ammunition is 1 to 6 in Russia's favor, which is also receiving important assistance from North Korea. We are grateful for the timely initiative of the Czech Republic to procure and deliver ammunition to Ukraine. And we appreciate Poland's support for this initiative. It will save lives and it will help us to push back the aggressor. We also welcome the long-awaited agreement regarding the creation of a 5 billion Ukraine assistance fund within the European Peace Facility. We look forward to its approval in the coming days and hope that it will be an efficient instrument which would help us to continue liberating our land. Together with Ukraine Facility, we see this new Ukraine Assistance Fund as an important pillar for the future EU security commitments for Ukraine. So apart from artillery ammunition, our key needs on the battlefield include right now air defense systems, long-range missiles, modern combat aircraft, drones, electronic warfare, and demining equipment. And last but not least, we need to step up our cooperation with the EU on defense industries and joint production of weapons. We welcome the EU initiative to open an Office of Defense and Innovations in Kyiv. We see it as an opportunity to speed up joint projects that would allow us to ensure technological superiority over the aggressor. So, on sanctions, I would like also to summarize where we are now. So, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, the EU has imposed 13 package of sanctions, which target some sectors of Russian economy. But the key sectors of Russia's war machine are still bringing high profits. And these sectors are very well known. Export of oil and gas, export of raw materials, nuclear sector, metallurgy. Therefore, to undermine Russia's war efforts, further sectorial sanctions are needed. We expect that the next 14th package of sanctions will address some of these issues. Also, we hope that it will include a ban on EU imports of Russian and Belarusian grain, as well as food products from these countries. There is also a pressing need to hit Russia's supply chains and close loopholes for dual-purpose goods to Russia for weapon production. It is also necessary to synchronize sanctions on Russia and Belarus, as Russia used Belarus to circumvent sanctions. We also believe that EU can explore possibility to step up sanctions against Russia for its massive human rights violations in Ukraine. And EU has a tool for that, which is a global human rights sanction regime, which is, in our opinion, hasn't been used enough so far. Accession. Ambassador already mentioned where we are now, so I would like just to add to what he said, that we are committed to move as fast as possible on this path to deliver what we have to deliver, and we believe that we have all grounds for the positive Commission's report, hopefully next week. And it is very important that the negotiation framework, which has been presented by the Commission a couple of days ago, is approved by member states without delays. Because accession for us, it's not only reforms, it's about also the prospects of our country to succeed in recovery, reconstruction, and also on security matters, in fact. So we really hope for bold decisions and further support of EU partners on this part, which is very important for us. If we think about how to defeat Russia, we have to think about how to ensure accountability. And here a lot has been done already, but we still have to make more to ensure that no other dictator dares to repeat the war of aggression against any country. So we need to make Russia pay for everything it did in Ukraine, and we need to bring their leadership accountable. We welcome the decisions on and legal instruments which open the way to using the revenues from immobilized Russian assets for Ukraine needs. We also expect the next meaningful step, finding the legal grounds for using not only the revenues from Russian assets, but the seized Russian assets themselves for the benefit of Ukraine. However, our goal should be confiscation of Russian assets, including the sovereign assets of Russian Central Bank. And we welcome fresh ideas from some partners in this regard. And I'm turning here to the last part of the title of this event, Implications for the Future. I believe that overall, to change the course of war, a new approach to supporting Ukraine is needed. And it is needed right now, unfortunately. So I think that instead of supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, we should say ourselves that the focus should be put support Ukraine until its victory. And here it is important also to consolidate a common vision how Ukrainian victory should look like. For us, in Ukraine, it is clear. It's full restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, including Crimea. Russia must pay for what it did and return all our deported people, liberate all prisoners. But any compromise at Ukraine's cost on Russian terms would mean a postponed war in Europe. And we are happy to see that more and more EU member states realize this. And here I would like to quote yesterday's article, which appeared in Ukrainian media by Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, Radoslav Sikorski, together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Czech Republic. So, and I quote, "The choice is clear. We can either deal with the defeated Russian army in Ukraine's eastern border, or a victorious and emboldened one right at the NATO's doorstep." So I think here, at this point, everybody must realize that we still need to do much more to ensure that this scenario doesn't happen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Diakun. And now Ms. Jolanta Szymańska from Polish Institute of International Affairs will take the floor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all at our today's event about European Union support for Ukraine. The reason why we meet today is not only to discuss the European Union support, but also to promote our recent publication, the Polish Institute of International Affairs publication, which you can see here now, and which I had a great pleasure to coordinate. And at the beginning of my introduction, I would like to say some words about this publication. The first question I want to address is why we decided to write about the European Union response to this war and to this crisis. Frankly speaking, I know that maybe this European response and European Union effort is recognized quite well here in Brussels, among Brussels bubble, but we had an impression that outside the European Union capital, it's not so well recognized, because all the experts and speakers on every conferences mainly focus on NATO involvement, on American support, especially military aspect of support for Ukraine. And we just wanted to show that European Union has its fair share in this common efforts to support Ukraine. And we also want to show how this war changed European Union as such. So how, what was the influence of this war on European Union sectoral policies? And let me start by saying that this Russia full-scale aggression against Ukraine, which began already more than 2 years ago, has taken the European Union by surprise. It came as surprise, despite the fact that symptoms of the deterioration of the situation in the eastern neighborhood and signals of Russian military preparation had reached the European Union at least a few months before the invasion. And this aggressive phase of Russian imperialism was evident years before the full-scale invasion. And the manifestations of it were the war in Georgia in 2008 and illegal annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass, which has been ongoing since 2014. But Russia has also previously committed provocations against the European Union. Just to remind you, the Sergei Skripal chemical attack in the United Kingdom in 2018, all the border crisis, which began in 2021, provoked by Belarus, but with support of Russia, and which is actually still taking place on the border of Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. But also the disinformation campaign that took place before European parliamentary elections in 2019. So we had many symptoms of this activeness of Russia in the European Union on our territory. But only this Russia full-scale invasion awakened us, the European Union, from this strategic sleep negatively verifying the effectiveness of our Eastern policy. And what was the situation, internal situation in the European Union in 2022? The situation was difficult because we were just recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, which affected not only our health systems and our way of life, but also our budget and economy. And we were actually afraid of huge crisis that can take, economic crisis that can come after this pandemic. Brexit was still a fresh one. Economic consequences were mostly felt by British themselves, but for the European Union, it was for sure the huge shock and very negative element for the image of the Union as such. We were also on that time worry about a potential migration crisis that can come after withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan and the repression of the Taliban, but also the hybrid attacks at the border that I already mentioned on the eastern border. So from the one hand, of course, we can say that European Union develops from crisis to crisis. So the situation was quite normal, but we have to say that it was difficult for sure. But despite this fact that the crisis came by surprise and that the conditions were difficult, the reaction of the European Union was very swift, and we stress in almost every chapter of our book that the reaction for this invasion was better than expected. So we didn't have huge expectations, we can say from one hand, but it was really unexpected for us, even as an expert on Ukraine and European Union. You can say that we were somehow surprised that this reaction was so fast. And this developing of coherent EU response to Russian aggression has required abounding this attachment in policies of many member states to this vision of partnership with Russia as a guarantor of stability in the eastern neighborhood. It has also taken the extraordinary mobilization of EU institutions and solidarity of EU member states. We should not forget about huge social support that was the crucial factor at the beginning. Especially we could see many examples of solidarity from European citizens coming to the border, Polish-Ukrainian border, to support refugees, to offer places in their own homes, and so on and so on. So this was, I think, a strong push for the reaction on decision makers. So as a result, the EU has restored to unprecedented measure. Its response has been multidimensional, ranging from military, financial, humanitarian support to Ukraine, but also sanctions against Russia. In our book, we focus not only on response as such, but also its impact to European Union policies. And we analyze the impact of this war and the response to this war on the concept of strategic autonomy, the security and defense policy, sanctions policy, enlargement policy, and discussion about institutional reforms of the European Union, this new chapter of this discussion about the institutional reform, which is linked directly with the enlargement policy. And so we also analyzed a European economic budget, but also future relation between European Union and Ukraine. We analyze energy policy, development policy, migration and asylum policy, but also role of the European Union in shaping criminal law and building resilience to challenges in the information sphere. What is interesting and what I want to say also as one of the conclusions that we have from our analysis, that many of the tools used by European Union countries were already available in EU legislation, for example. Just to give you an example, because I was responsible for preparing the chapter about migration policy, this temporary protection directive that was implemented before the war in former Yugoslavia, but never used in practice. And suddenly it became the main tool to solve the crisis, the refugee crisis on the border with Ukraine, but also in other fields like energy policy. We already made many good steps under the umbrella of Green Deal that made this effort easier after the escalation of this conflict. So I think it's good to take it also into consideration that we can think about, we can do some steps before. I mean, we can prepare for this kind of challenges before. But I want to also add, and I think we all are aware of that more difficult part of the response is still ahead of us. And this ongoing conflict and the situation that is not very good now in Ukraine requires the continuation of this EU strong involvement in supporting Ukraine, generally speaking, in supporting Eastern neighborhood, and support for fighting Ukraine, including financial and military assistance, but also maintaining the dynamic of the process of the Ukraine accession to the European Union. And the war fatigue, this term that we can hear very often in the context of a long war in Ukraine, cannot be an excuse. I mean, we cannot be tired of this effort, especially in the context of uncertain situation and this uncertainty coming from United States and the directions of foreign policy after potential Trump's victory in United States, but also developments in our continent after European Parliament elections, because we still don't know the result of the election. So we need to work together to maintain this political and public support for Ukraine, although we are, I think, all aware that it's kind of challenge. Okay, so my time is already gone. So I want to say at the end that it's really a pleasure to be here. And if you want to learn more about our analysis and our conclusions with regard to the first phase of reaction of the European Union to the invasion, I enhance you to I want to encourage you actually to read our publication, which is available on PISM website in Polish and in English. And if you want to find more about challenging faces the European Union policies, I mean, especially two policies, the security policy and sanctions policy, please stay with us for the rest of the conference because our colleagues will deliver on these topics. Thank you very much and enjoy the event.
Thank you, Jolanta. And now I want to introduce to the scene the participants of the first discussion panel that will be moderated by Ms. Diakun from the Polish Institute of International Affairs.
Yes, yes, you can sit. Is it working? Yes. Is everything? We are quite in a hurry. Welcome to the first panel discussion on EU support related to Ukraine reconstruction and recovery. My name is Jolanta. I'm a senior research fellow at PISM. I have a great privilege to moderate a panel with great panelists. Please let me introduce them in alphabetic order. We have together with us Ms. Tinatin, Akhvlediani, research fellow from the Center for European Policy Studies. We have Mr. Rafał Dzięciołowski, president of the Solidarity Fund, Poland. Ms. Natalie Pawlowicz, head of Unit Ukraine Service, the Junior European Commission, and Ms. Maja Repko, deputy director, Center for Economic Strategy, Kiev. So to start with, the French saying is that l'argent est le nerf de la guerre. Money is the sinew of war. We all know that the resilience of Ukrainian economy is a vital factor to win this war. And after the first shock in 2022 and the fall of GDP of around 30%, last year the economy stabilized. And this is thanks, obviously, to international assistance, which helped to sustain macro-financial stability. But we have to remember that it is also thanks to Ukrainian own resilience. The fact that the business is running on a daily basis, the fact that Ukraine managed to break a blockade at Black Sea. I mean, this is all very important. And at the same time, we all know that the recovery needs are huge. You know, the direct infrastructure damage has reached almost $152 billion, and recovery and reconstruction needs are estimated at almost $486 billion in incoming 10 years. Moreover, we all know that Ukraine faces labor force shortages and because 6 million people left the country. So in this light, the big question which I pose to myself is, you know, to what extent the EU and IMF could help sustain the stability of Ukrainian economy in longer term. What else other than financial assistance we can do? You know, what other tools we can do to increase Ukrainian growth, and to what extent we could use the EU accession process in this respect. And with those big questions, I would like to start with Ms. Maja Repko to shed a light on to us on current the most pressing needs of Ukrainian economy. What is the state of play, and also what is to-do list for international donors and basically the EU.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here, and dziękuję bardzo Polska za wszystko, co zrobiliście i tam zrobicie dla Ukrainy. And starting from the economic station, you actually have already told a lot of what I was going to talk about. So we currently, I guess I can describe the situation in Ukraine as a sort of temporary bar, right? After this huge fall in 2022, 2023 was a stabilization, the temporary equilibrium, which is really shaky, and for which we, of course, thank to our partners and their financial support, but also the military of Ukraine, which were able to regain some territories back in 2022 and then hold on the line, which was not easy at all. Thanks to this, some business activity was restored. People got to work in Kiev. You can see the restaurants and cafes open, and the city is more or less vibrant, except for already 1,000 of air alerts we recently celebrated. Put it like this. But the domestic demand is very low, and it is not recovering at all after this big fall. We have poverty, which is 2 times bigger than the pre-war level. Unemployment is 2 times bigger than the pre-war level, and the investments are really minimal because the companies are not sure in the future, not sure they want to build new capacities, not sure they have actually the environment where they could grow. So the future for Ukraine, it actually depends not only on Ukraine and its military, but on the partners' efforts as well. To put the words into numbers, why is it so important? Why is it vital, the help? Ukraine spent last year, 2023, slightly over 60 billion euros into defense efforts. I think it was 63 or something if we calculate the combined expenditures. Russia spent well over 100 billion, like really well over 100 billion. We don't know the figure for sure, but it's huge. Ukraine having spent 60 billion and having spent another 60 billion on all of the rest of the governmental function, the healthcare, the education, and so on and so forth. This rest of the spending was actually frozen at the pre-war level, at the level of 2021 in euro terms and in terms of the percentage of GDP. It means that we don't have really a lot of room to increase our war budget. And to be able to recover, we first need to survive, right, to withstand the 2024. We already see that 2024 will test first Ukraine's capability of defense, and second, the partners' willingness to support us. This is the other challenge, which is also very, very important. We see that we have problems in both departments currently, with Avdiivka, with the US, with the situation in Poland borders, with the trade and everything else. So here I'm coming to the to-do list now. Keeping this on mind. So first, military support. It is very important to understand that Ukraine is not able to increase substantially its military expenditures by itself. Even if Ukraine increases tax revenues, increases taxes and tax collection, it will be able to get maybe 1, 2, or 5 billion euros annually, but that's all it's able to do. It is not able to bring down the expenditures, which are really frozen, while we need a lot more. And all the international aid in terms of financial assistance, it is strictly prohibited to be spent for the military purposes. Not a single euro, which is coming to Ukraine's budget, would be used to pay the military salaries, to build fortifications, to procure ammunition, shells, and so on and so forth. So only in-kind military help counts, but financially it could not be used for this. And Ukraine doesn't have any more of financial resources from the own sources, while the situation on the battlefield clearly shows that we need more. This brings me to the point that we need really to reconsider the donors' policies towards providing the military aid. Maybe it is providing Ukraine with the access to frozen Russian assets and the windfall tax and the Euroclear money. Different estimations give the numbers from 2 to 8 billion euros annually. This is already a good number. We can go from here. The other option to allow spending of the EU peace facility for procurement ammunition from Ukrainian producers for Ukrainian army consumption, and allow spending this money to build fortifications in Ukraine to pay maybe military salaries. This is also very important. To be able to withstand 2024 Ukraine's mobilization, because human resources in the army is also an issue. Ukraine needs to build the second line of fortifications, which Russia successfully did, and we saw the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which just was stopped because of this line. Ukraine doesn't have it. And we need, of course, more arrows, as has been already said. We have this 1:6 ratio, which is really not good. We don't have a lot of bullets, to throw to the bottle as Russia does. So to be able to withstand this year, we need to fight with the arms, not with people. And just to more purely economic points, what can be done? The problem with human resources, it could be resolved via the IDP policies, internationally displaced population, internally displaced people, those who stayed in Ukraine, not went abroad. Again, to put numbers into perspective, Ukraine has 3.5 million internally displaced people, like sort of local refugees. Europe, US, UK, Canada, and all the developed world together has faster than 3.6 million people. So Ukraine's effort in accommodating its internal migrants is actually equal to the effort of the rest of the world, right? So we have the same number of people outside and inside Ukraine. That's the latest estimations done by the Center for Economic Strategy, and you could find the numbers on our website. So in order to match the demand for the workforce, which with the supply of the workforce, we need education, we need educational programs, employment programs, and we need housing in the areas where the most of the production facilities are situated. This is very important, and thank you for the support for housing reconstruction and schools and medical facilities and so on. So this is the first point. And the second point is closing economic gaps. Closing economic gaps means first, protect major production assets, more air defense for Kiev, for Kharkiv, for Odessa, for Sumy, for all the regions where there is a business, where there is production, and which is currently shelled by Russia. Second, electricity generation. We lost the British nuclear power plant. This was the biggest, really huge nuclear power energy producer. Now to recover business activity in some foreseeable future, like several years ahead, we will need more electricity. It means that a private-public partnership or European member states guarantees for private investors of European companies could be regarded in these terms. And last but not least, for trade. On both ports, we see already that Ukrainian marine drones are doing a stellar job in bringing down Russian military fleet in the Black Sea. But we need the situation to continue. And we need, of course, unblocked land border with Poland, and we need this free trade to go on. There is no economic reason for this blockade, really. But I guess that's mostly political. I hope it will be resolved in the next future. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll switch now to Ms. Paulos, and thank you, Maria, for a clear picture. And like to hear from you what is the EU response to those needs. What about the closing this financing gap for this year and next year? What is the prioritization of the area?
Yes, thank you.
And the division of labor between other donors as well, because the EU is in a leader of this platform coordination.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. It's not easy to come after the various speakers that we've heard so far, because many of them have already outlined a lot of what it is that the European Union has done until now to support Ukraine, and also to a certain extent what we have put on the table, including very recently with our Ukraine facility, which has now entered into force. So this is the the means with which we are going to provide up to 50 billion euros in economic support to Ukraine over the next 4 years. And really, I'm coming here from the perspective of economic support, certainly not military support. It's been mentioned, in fact, by the previous speaker that there are, of course, conditions attached to economic support, and that includes precisely the fact that it cannot be used then for military purposes. At the same time, I think that when we look, and it was mentioned by Jolanta, I believe, the fact that the support provided by the European Union so far, it has been holistic. We are doing our best, our utmost to provide all the support we can, whether it's military, economic support in the form of help for Ukrainians who have fled and arrived here in the European Union. And all that amounts to over 88 billion euros so far. So that is really the level of support that we've provided. But I think, I mean, the previous speaker in particular has outlined the challenges, and I think maybe because the title of the event is really looking at sort of recovery and modernization, which might seem somewhat well, let's say unusual in the context that we have at the moment, which is the ongoing war and the fact that, you know, every day there is further destruction. At the same time, I think we all realize that we really need to continue to provide support, not for different things. One, to continue to help Ukraine balance the books in a sense, keep the budget to meet sort of the essential needs of the government, to allow it also to continue to focus on the war effort, obviously. And there, we're also looking at how we can, in turn, also sort of boost the economy, bring in sort of more prospects for economic growth, bring in private sector investment, more public investments, and finally also bring people back and allow people who have stayed to, you know, to contribute in a way to that effort as well. And our Ukraine facility, which I really want to talk the most about, because that is what I've worked the most on, and that we're really focusing our efforts in DG NEAR on, is trying to do all those things through the 3 essential sort of mechanisms that are built into the Ukraine facility. And the first is what we call the first pillar, and that's budget support. So really support to the state budget, but linked to a plan of reforms and investments that we consider to be needed. These are the prioritization really of that kind of support and how it will be used. That is done and determined by the government of Ukraine. I mean, I think that has to be very clear. This is the plan put together by the government of Ukraine in a whole of government approach. So that has been done by a team put together by the Prime Minister's office to work together and decide on what are the priorities for the next 4 years in terms of reforms and investments. And then I'm kind of going to quickly sketch out sort of what the main pillars are, but also link them to what I was saying before. So this is the second pillar now, which is the Ukraine investment framework. This is really linked to how to crowd in public and private investment in Ukraine. And we feel that it's absolutely essential in light of what has been said about the risk environment at the moment, the fact that there's a lot of hesitation on the part of investors to invest. We are bringing in a Ukraine guarantee. We're essentially providing backing of the European Union's budget to those investments to essentially de-risk them, to take on part of the risks that investors might otherwise face and say, we'll cover those risks for you through this guarantee that we have. And then there's also a certain amount of money also to blend finance with sort of grant funding, basically with private or public finance in order to invest in recovery and reconstruction. And there, the idea is also in terms of how that will be prioritized, how the use of that fund will be prioritized. It again links back to the Ukraine plan and the investments and needs set out in that plan. And then finally, we have the third pillar of the Ukraine facility, and this is about technical assistance and support for capacity building, because it's been mentioned as well. I mean, the government really faces enormous needs in relation to, you know, absorbing funds from donors, to get projects going on the ground, to deal with all of the constraints that it faces. So that third pillar is really there to provide that kind of technical assistance, but also linked then to the accession process and to helping the government of Ukraine to work on accession-related requirements, especially for priority sectors. So that's a bit how the Ukraine facility is constructed, really to try to address what we know to be challenges that exist now and will probably continue, unfortunately, but for the let's say medium term. In terms of, I mean, it's not the only tool that the European Union has. Others have been mentioned. There is work ongoing on the use of frozen assets. We'll have to see sort of what revenues could be generated potentially from that work and how they could eventually, if it is so decided, be channeled through the Ukraine facility. Because the Ukraine facility does contain a provision that would allow for any such resources to be used then eventually in the way that would be decided at the time. So,
Can I have a question? When will you publish this proposal, legislative one, how to...
On frozen assets. Yeah. Well, I think at the moment there's been a first step that has already been taken, which is really to make sure that certain revenues are already put in a separate account and essentially blocked for a potential next step, let's say, which would be now deciding a bit on how that will be done. And I think that the Commission is going to be putting on the table a proposal for discussion with member states. And I think at the moment it's a bit premature to say when exactly that will happen. I think it depends on the pace of that discussion and also, how member states are engaging with the issue, because I think many of you who have followed it are aware that the legal questions around the use of these assets has been long discussed and it's not super straightforward.
I think that people will have some questions to Ukraine facility afterwards. But now I would like to, if I may,
Of course, yes.
To switch to Ms. Rafał Dzięciołowski, just to hear what are the practical lessons learned of delivering financial assistance in Ukraine, because Solidarity Fund has been involved for many years in Ukraine.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It's a great honor for me to be here today with you. Talking about the activity of Solidarity Fund in Ukraine. We have a branch office in Kyiv from 2019, but we are present in Ukraine for a long period of time, working as a Polish implementation agency, supporting the process of implementation development cooperation with Ukraine in various fields, which are fascinating for us because we work with civil society, we promote democracy, we promote democratic values, we promote social activity, we promote also freedom of speech in Ukraine also. And the moment the war came to our doorstep was demanding also for the fund, because we had to change our attitude toward Ukraine. We had to involve the humanitarian aid into the activity of our development agency. It's not an easy answer whether we should do it or not, whether we should be active in this field or simply looking to the development of the circumstances of events, because it is not always obvious that development cooperation is closely linked to the humanitarian support. And this war in Ukraine has learned us about that. There is a connection, and there is a positive connection. The experiences of being a development agency at work in Ukraine for such a long time made some serious advantages for the foundation. We had contacts, we had information, we had technical way to come to the eastern parts of Ukraine, because I should mention it earlier, We worked in the eastern part of Ukraine, part of Luhansk, Donetsk, also Odessa and Zaporozhye. These regions were highly attacked during the first period of the war, and also the vicinity of Kiev. So we had those friends, we had their friends, we had close contacts with the society. We worked with the Hromadas, I mean, this smallest parts of Ukrainian self-government system. We supported them before the war, and may I say that we got the evidence and experienced the strength of the self-government system of Ukraine. I can proudly say that we are proud that this system is so developed and proved in practice during the war, proving its resilience and resistance to the occupants. I must say, I remember till now my speech by phone with a major of Trościaniec after the Russians occupied the town. And he finished his talk with me always with the one phrase, "Prapor nad Miejską Radą Ukraińską." Right? I mean, the banner over the Miejska Rada building, still Ukrainian one. So this shows the ability and resilience of the self-government to protect its citizens, to protect neighbors, to even, it's fascinating for me, even to be ready to work as a self-government institution during the war. This is something unique for me. And if you ask me whether Ukrainian is an adult society ready to become a member of EU, yes, I think this war experience proves that the society of Ukraine is strong, that the society of Ukraine is self-organized, and they do believe in the values we common with them, we commonly share with them, because that's also important, that the fighting nation, fighting people of Ukraine evoke our fundamental values of European culture and of European unity. I mean solidarity. We are proud we have solidarity in our in the name of our foundation. Yes, we have international solidarity. We do believe it's not just how to say a slogan or a kind of dualism. It's a real meaning words and a real program for today and for tomorrow, for Ukraine and for European Union. And this is a great achievement of Ukrainian people. So if we think that, if we ask ourselves whether this support for Ukraine is a good spent investment, I would say yes, they prove it every day on the battlefield. They prove it every day when they show the resilience of their state, and also they prove it when they so bravely fight, because it's a unique experience to watch fighting Ukrainian soldiers. I would like also to say that perhaps we were in a good position because we started already, we were already there in this regions, eastern regions of Ukraine. And my first conclusion from this period of being a de facto humanitarian agency and not development agency is trying to be as close to the final beneficiary as possible. Be there. I remember I used to be photographer, correspondent. And I remember Robert Capa, a famous military correspondent and photographer, wrote, "If your picture is not good enough, you are not close enough." This may be also the credo of working with humanitarian aid and development aid also. Be as close as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for such encouraging experience. Tinatin, Tina, I would like to ask you, having in mind, the huge uncertainty about American funding in coming years, What do you think, what solutions other than on financial assistance might the EU adopt to strengthen the Ukraine resilience?
Thanks a lot. Indeed, this is a very good question because, of course, we talk about the reconstruction, but if we look at the 2024 itself, just this year, there's a 14 billion that Ukraine needs just to keep its economy afloat, right? And we have so far only 5 billion secured, while the rest 9 billion is just a gap, 8.5, so around 9 billion. And this is not a small amount of money, right? So that's what Ukraine needs to actually make it to the end of the year. And there definitely there's the support from the international partners, but when we look at the country's economy and also when we look at what EU has already done since the start of the war, we have the answers there, right? Having solidarity lanes in place, having autonomous trade measures that really allow Ukraine to access the EU single market. These are the things that worked very well. These are the things that actually kept Ukraine functioning, and the trade is still there and it's recovered by the end of the 2022. So these are the tools that EU has. So what do we need to keep, Ukraine economy going is to have a bit more certainty, because ATMs, again, autonomous trade measures to allow the full access to the EU single market, are temporary and then they're extended. It would be really good because we're talking about businesses, right? So they can plan, but we have a bit more visibility whether they will be extended, what will be the terms when they are extended. And the other things is, like, we know to access the EU single market, any product has to be in line with the, thousands of directives and regulations of the EU single market. So everything that EU does to support the conformity of the Ukrainian goods to the EU standards is basically a big plus. For instance, there are the number of ACAs that, Ukraine still has to conform with. This will be definitely a big steps ahead that allow Ukrainian exports to come to the single market. Another thing is what we also witness some sensitivities around agricultural produce and exports of Ukraine. And here again, the EU has a clear role to play because trade is the EU competence. And of course, member states take it by their, sides and given their own internal situations. But EU definitely has a role here to play, to mediate, to monitor the process. So that, if Ukrainian goods would become a burdensome for any country because they're the entry gate to the EU single market, then trade corridors could be arranged so the products do not stay there, they go, other countries, because there is a massive demand on the Ukrainian agricultural produce, right? Grain is something that a lot of countries need in Europe and beyond, and that can be definitely arranged. So, response here that, some countries, just protest about it, it's just not a good response. And neither for those countries, not for Ukraine, not for the EU. So there has to be just simply more mediation on that. Again, this will help the Ukrainian economy. Another part is investments, and I think other speakers, Maria and Natalie, have already touched upon that, and it's very, very important because what we can observe in the data is how the foreign investments plummeted in Ukraine since the start of the war, which doesn't come as a surprise, of course. And to this regard, the second pillar of Ukraine facility with 8 billion comes really as a very fair and timely initiative with the guarantees for investment framework. It's so far the largest we can find amongst the Ukraine's international partners, 8 billion. However, given the needs of the country, it's just still small. Why I say that? Because according to the ADNA, which is the estimates of the World Bank, around up to 1/3 of the needs of reconstruction should come from the private capital. Now, the latest estimates of the reconstruction needs are around 450 billion, 453 billion. 1/3 of that is more than 100 billion, right? It's a lot of money. So you look at the investments we need from the private sector, over 100 billion. So far, we have 8 billion. You see numbers like we need more. And of course, you cannot do it alone. I mean, this is where the other international partners come in play. And I have in mind EBRD, World Bank. That simply requires war insurance that has to be put together with all the partners of Ukraine. It has to be creative. Of course, we're talking about insuring here, war-related risks, which is so difficult to even measure. But it does mean that there are no solutions, right? The insurance industry could estimate and could secure the pandemic costs. I'm sure there could be some guarantees found there. That's when it comes to the investment. So we do need more insurance here. Another point key is human resources that was mentioned by all the other speakers. Because you can, of course, give the money to the country, but if there is no human capital, how do you intend to spend this money? There is a human capital, and every time I speak to Ukrainian experts who come from the ground, this comes as the top priority, that there are no human resources in the country to even undertake properly the reforms that the country needs to, fulfill for the European integration. And then, of course, labor shortages comes on top of that. So here, Ukraine needs its own plan, maybe part of Ukraine plan, maybe something else. How does the country deal with the shortage of labor and, insufficient resources of human capital? I will stop soon. One more point. And of course, EU sharing best practices will definitely help. And the last point, but it's very important, is the public communication. Because, and that's a very important part of the resilience, because country is at war. The enlargement process has been going unprecedentedly fast for Ukraine and the other candidates like Moldova, for instance. That also set some expectations into the public in Ukraine, I have in mind, also in the EU, but more so in Ukraine. There should be clear strategy how the country communicates. How is the progress to the enlargement, to the EU accession, and what really needs to be done so that there are no gaps into the, expectations. If there are the gaps, then we have the problem. Then we have fake news, then we have disinformation, then we have misinformation. We know very well how they work, particularly from carrying also, Chinese sources. So this should not happen. I think the Ukraine, together with the EU, should have a very clear strategy how they communicate the progress and the expectations of Ukraine's accession to the EU. And I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Tinatin, for very clear points. Now I would like to switch from this part of short and medium-term recovery to EU accession process as a tool of modernization for Ukraine. And I would like to switch to Ms. Natalie Baubas, but I would like to just to end this session to comment, if you may comment on war insurance, what the EU is doing in this respect, and then to address the question, how do you approach, the question of modernization of Ukraine in the scope of EU accession negotiations with Ukraine.
Okay, thanks very much. On the question of war insurance, so already last year, even before last year, in late 2022, there were quite some discussions between the EU and many of the international financial institutions around sort of what war insurance already exists, what could actually be used in the Ukraine context. Those discussions continued, and you may remember, those who followed the Ukraine Recovery Conference that took place in London last year, there was some focus on this issue. It's true that the offer has been fairly limited until now. And I think that a lot of the offer has been more focusing on sort of course, coverage of risks for foreign investors into Ukraine. And I think what we have been trying to focus on from the EU perspective is how to build an insurance market within Ukraine. I mean, how do you do that? Because obviously what we want is to boost the economy of Ukraine itself and not only to help foreign investment. So we are continuing to work with some of our partners, notably the EBRD, on a pilot risk insurance scheme that could be started, we still hope this year, that would be focusing mainly on inland transport issues. So this is a bit the idea, to start in a pilot phase, looking at sort of one particular sector and seeing how that works, and then with the aim of scaling it up. But what I want to say is coming back to the Ukraine investment framework, which is the second pillar of the Ukraine facility. This is the kind of initiative, the kind of project, if I want to put it that way, that we would like to be able to precisely kind of focus on. It's among the types of activities that we think would be candidate in a way for pillar 2. But we do need to find programs that are possible, feasible, implementable, and that will achieve the objective that I've already set out. So work continues essentially on this. On modernization, your question is a very big one.
What are crucial reforms to be undertaken by Ukraine to modernize?
Yeah.
If you could just give us 3 major reforms which Ukraine has to do in in coming 10 years. As part of your Ukraine plan, which you have been working for 1 year already with Ukrainian government.
Okay, well, not quite a year, but certainly work on the Ukraine plan has been focused mainly on the types of reforms and investments that are needed to boost the economy, right? I mean, the accession process is another parallel process, and the two should be mutually reinforcing in our view. First, accession, it covers the whole acquis, everything. And we know that that is a long process and it has to happen in order for Ukraine to join the EU. The Ukraine plan is linked to this 4-year Ukraine facility, but the idea is also to say through this plan, we should be focusing on the key reforms really needed to boost the economy, to boost economic growth. And those include everything from public administration reform, public finance management, the justice sector, rule of law. It could involve some reforms related to banking. I mean, there are lots of things, including also sectoral reforms. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are about 15 sectors that are identified at the moment in the plan. And I see a colleague from she's nodding to me, yes, who's working more closely on the plan. There are reforms related to human capital, salaries. I mean, so really, and it sounds like a lot, but it's still limited if you compare with accession, where, you know, obviously that's so much more because it's the whole acquis. So that's in a nutshell what I would say about how we have been working with the government to try and identify what are the priorities to modernize and hopefully even allow Ukraine to start sort of leapfrogging over some other steps that the EU member states have maybe had to take to become as modern as they are today. Possibly not always even as modern. But.
Sure. So now I would like to switch to Maria. You're economist, and if you think about long-term development of Ukraine, you know, what economic comparative advantages of Ukraine should be used, you know, where the focus should be made if we think about long-term modernization of Ukraine.
Yeah, does it work? Switch. Yeah, thank you for this question. And just let me react to that. I like the question of give us 3 major reforms. It was good because our government recently have calculated how many reforms have to be done, and that's 226 for the year 2024. It encompasses the European enlargement package, the IMF conditionalities, the World Bank conditionalities, and of course the EU facility Ukraine plan. So it could be more than 3, and all of them are of course important. So that's the reform matrix, which was recently developed, and I encourage all of you to just go and take a look to have the impression of the scale of the work that Ukrainian public servants are facing right now, besides the war. So what's important here and what's important for our government as well is, of course, to choose those which can provide fast results in terms of economic growth, which is not really easy because over half of the reforms are institutional. It means that the rules of selection of the head of, let's say, customs or the anti-corruption authorities has to be changed, and these are that way, like to create some committee or create some additional procedure to be able to do this and that. So that's not giving us a direct and immediate impact. The other, like 30 to 35% is structural reforms, which is great because, for example, one of the reforms, I think it was in the World Bank conditionalities, is the opening for freight, for example, for freight railway transportation to private companies, which is great because now we have it in the state's hands. The other 11% is economic and fiscal stabilization, including the revenue collection and so on and so forth. So while this is all very important, I just can't stress enough how much I agree with my fellow panelists on what needs to be done. What is insurance, of course. We're talking about this since 2022 in different conferences and different setups. More mediation and trade, thank you, Tinatin. Really, because, and I would add to this more data-based approach, because, for example, Ukraine was has already achieved improvement in marine trade when the protests started in Poland. We are doing like 70 to 80, I guess, % of the grain trade via the Black Sea ports, via the Danian ports. And the share of this, automobile transportation is really very minor in agro. You can, I would love to be able to show you the charts, but I'm not. But that's actually easy to find. So, and then the protests began, and it's already like the issue was already resolved by protesting now. So I guess the data-based approach is very important. And from this blockade, actually, the other Ukrainian producers, for those guys who produce furniture, those who produce sweets, chocolate, those guys who are trying to import stuff from the European Union and from Poland itself. So this is a huge problem, and it goes political after several really ugly incidents, because Ukraine have survived through Holodomor, and this is a very big generational trauma for us. I mean, of course, not everyone understands what can relate, and that's totally fine. But that is why it's even more sensitive. And the last but not the least, human capital. We don't have enough public servants who are able to do this UAKI exercise. And the more important is that our Minister of Finance, thanks God, succeeded in the public service salary reforms last year. They introduced great payment system. For that, Ukrainian public servants were getting really very small salaries, and the majority of this amount was given to them as a premium, as the top up, not as the basic salary, and that was a huge risk always for not getting something. Now the salaries are increased, and some more capable people are now able to join the public service. Yeah, and that's important. And important is also from the EU side to support the education of Ukrainian lawyers on the EU law, because that's the beginning of the road. And I think that many projects in this area should happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Mr. Ciecielewski, I would like to ask you about the decentralization reform, because during war, the fact that Ukraine has delivered this reform was one of a factor contributing to its resilience. So my question is, what we might done more to strengthen decentralization in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we must say that for the first time we have seen this process of decentralization in action, and we can estimate it as quite successful. The history of decentralization is a long history in Ukraine. It was fighting against this burden of communism, because in the communistic countries like Poland, for instance, it's my experience from my country, there was no real self-government, and the division of power and enabling people to take their fate in their own hands. And this process in Ukraine is complicated, of course. It has its own story with highlights and dark shades. But what did, I think, it is my personal estimation, what did to this process is we have a proof of the resilience of the society on this decentralized level. And this is a good, point of start to continue the reforms. This is the first step. The second step is that there were a year or 2 years ago, quite emotional discussion in Ukraine, whether the decentralization, or even during the Yanukovych regime, whether the decentralization expected by European Union and supported by the European Union is the same process as division of the Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. Yes, this process which Russia put in this self-government, how to say it, Autonomous, yes. And this process is, for nowadays, I think it's already clear that decentralization is not the autonomization of Ukraine and dividing of Ukraine. This is also a good point to start the process of decentralization, of strengthening decentralization, because the process already has started. What is now needed is to strengthening this process. And of course, it demands from the government the very will to do that and to give the decentralized formadas real tools to exist and to work. And this process is going, I think, because as you see, this Akhvlediani format, they have the tools, the law is changing in this direction to support them with their activity and to give instruments to the responsibilities they should carry.
Thanks. I think that later on, Ms. Bowes could say us more about the EU supporting decentralization, because I know that you have a good, big projects in this field. But coming back to Tinatin, you know, the rule of law reforms are crucial in terms of bringing investments into Ukraine, which are very low currently in the long term. So what tips in terms of shaping the conditionality in the field of rule of law you could give to the European Commission? We will most probably, I hope so, that we will have a cluster on fundamentals opened next year. So please go on.
That's a very good question, but I also think some of the panelists already answered these questions, because all we see now are the conditionalities, right? All of the reforms that Ukraine has to undertake, then plus the IMF conditionalities, other conditionalities from the other partners. So any money that comes into the country comes with conditionalities. So I don't think we have lack of conditionalities. It's more about being realistic. What are the priorities for them? Because the country is at war, right? And the reforms undertaken still are very impressive because the country is in this very emergency situation. So therefore, defining the priorities, having clear guidance from the EU, that's what should really come, what they expect, by when, what are the priorities, and how to, how they can do it. Sharing best practices. I would say this is more important than, having all the homework laid out right now, straight ahead. In this regard, of course, EU is very clear with the steps, because every step further for the enlargement comes with a set of conditions, right? And these conditions are very comprehensive. Sometimes they're very broad. Enlargement process goes fast, but we also don't know what is the next step exactly. We kind of have a view how the process will go, but we don't know exactly what's the next step. For instance, when there were conditions set up with the candidacy, we knew the conditions, but we didn't know, for instance, would we have a verbal review or the, written review? We had in the end a midterm review, which was verbal, but we just simply did not know. So that creates a bit of, could create some confusion. So far, it has not obscured the processes. The processes went well, but in the future, as the homework becomes bigger, as larger things are at stake, it will be extremely important that EU clarifies what are the steps that Ukraine has to take, and also could give guidance how Ukraine should meet them. Here again, Poland is a perfect example. Poland could share so many best practices to Ukraine, as are the other countries. First, they are doing it. I know, I know, and there is so much support in this field. The same refers to, for instance, Croatia, which is the latest country that joined the EU. I think that can be very, very important to share their best practices. And when it comes to maybe some economic reforms, because this is very, very important for the reconstruction to scale up and for the country's recovery. We mentioned decentralization. Everybody agrees this is key. Also, the recovery needs are extremely different across municipalities, across regions. So the uniform approach simply will not work here. But another thing I would say is corporate governance, that Ukraine has to really work properly. Why I say that? Because countries still together with the other countries, inherited all this Soviet past. Corporate governance is not something that is like fully developed and flourish or was flourishing before the outbreak of the war. Financial systems have to be upgraded, updated. So the corporate governance is another thing that, should be definitely move forward, in the also here.
We have like 10 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. Please raise your hands and introduce yourself and be concise.
I'm Olga Chizhova, Ukrainian.
Olga Chizhova, Ukrainian PRISM think tank focusing on Ukraine's foreign policy and international security. I actually have two questions. First one is the exact topic of our today's conference. EU support for Ukraine is the #1 topic in the information manipulation and interference campaigns aimed to influence the outcome of European elections. And in the same time, according to the latest polls, far-right parties in 18 countries of European Unions are in the top 3 in the ratings now. So potentially we might have the majority of the far-right in the future European Parliament. Probably the question is for the Natalie mostly. Are there any steps taken now to safeguard the results of the work the EU has been doing to support Ukraine, and more importantly, the future project that you are working on now after the election, if there is a change politically in the European Union? And the second question, everyone has mentioned human capacity as a problem, as an issue, a challenge for Ukraine's reconstruction and recovery. Do you know of any projects maybe common from Ukrainian and European side to offer some kind of training and preparation for those Ukrainians who are staying here now, to offer them professions, to train them for professions needed for Ukraine's recovery, to give them this training needed for increasing human capacity, but at the same time for giving them purpose and motivation to come back to Ukraine after the war is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maria Masłowska, EAS. I also have two questions, actually both addressed to Natalie and on the facility. One is reference to the reform that the facility is supposed to support. So we have two processes running in parallel. One is the enlargement and the other one is the facility. We have two council configurations. We have, let's say, trying to make it a more holistic approach, but in practice, how this is going to work, that when we approve any payments, any release of funding to Ukraine, that the process related to the facility does not prejudge the process related in the accession negotiations and the opening, closing of the chapters. This is first question. And the second question is also relating to the facility. So we as the EU are going to support the investments in Ukraine. Now, we are going to work with the banks. The banks are banks. They will need to get their income as well. So their natural tendency will be working where there's lesser risk, meaning in the West. How will you make sure that actually they are going to also work in the whole Ukrainian territory? Because what we are going to risk is that the support that the banks are going to, the investments are going to only profit one part of Ukraine and not the other one. And by this, we are going to undermine further a social fabric. Thanks.
Kinga Radowska.
Thank you so much. Kinga Radowska, Center for Financial Crime and Security Studies at the I have a question to Emily. Whether the European Union is planning addressing an issue related to human resources and some unintended consequences of enormous, unprecedented engagement of Western-based donors in Ukraine, who very often drain the brightest minds from public administration with their Western-based fees and opportunities. And I know the EU is planning to invest into trainings of public officials, but is there any, are there any plans from the EU perspective to support higher salaries and better kind of professional development opportunities for public officials. And if I make a comment to kind of follow on the question from colleague from Ukraine about kind of a sort of the wave of elections and certain fatigue related to the public perception in Europe related to engagement of Western countries in Ukraine. I think, and this relates to, of course, seizing central banks, Russian central bank assets. It's just more of a comment because I think for the last 2 years, we've heard so many reasons why seizing those assets is difficult. We've heard perspective of international lawyers and economists. Throughout the last year, we've heard many comments from well-acknowledged and renowned international lawyers that it's actually possible. And economists also say that dollar will actually not be hurt that much if we seize those assets. And I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for the policymakers in Europe and America to explain to their own taxpayers that they are contributing to reconstruction and of Ukraine, and at the same time, the same policymakers that are making those decisions are not able to effectively seize Russian central bank assets. And this is just a comment, but I would be also curious to learn the answer to the question about public resources. Thank you.
The last chance for a question. Anybody else? So I would like to ask the panelists to answer the questions on a voluntary basis. We will start with Natalie and go in this order, okay? And also if you have some closing remarks, please go on.
Okay, so thanks for the question. In relation to the first question on foreign manipulation, basically, in the elections and prospects, of course, we're not here, I'm not here certainly to speculate on the outcome of the elections coming up. But what I can say, it's not about whether we're safeguarding what we've achieved so far or even sort of planning for how we might deal with a future configuration in the parliament that might or might not be more or less supportive. I mean, the fact is that what we have now on the table, not on the table, what we have now adopted, the Ukraine facility is there, and it is the framework that will sort of, determine what we do at least until the end of this multi-annual financial framework. I think that the question would come up more in the context of thinking beyond sort of the new financial framework that will come beyond 2027 and sort of what we'll be thinking about doing beyond the current Ukraine facility time frame. And that will, of course, I think be determined also by how things evolve on the ground in Ukraine and the broader international context. Someone else mentioned elections in the US. I mean, there's so many factors, and I think we just have to see. But for the time being, what we have is a very solid framework that sets out what it is that we need to do with our support over the next 4 years. So at least insofar as economic support to Ukraine is concerned, linked to the Ukraine facility, I think there we are now starting to do the job of implementing it. We're expecting Ukraine, the government, to submit the Ukraine plan fairly soon, and that will kick off. We're about to make a first payment of 4.5 billion euros. I'm happy to mention that here. And more to come. So that's the main focus that we have at the moment. On the human capacity issue and training, and I think it comes a little bit linked to the question or the comment from Kinga as well about human resources. I mean, we're well aware of the huge needs in relation to training linked, whether it's to the accession process, but also just simply the fact that the government is under such strain. So many people have had to leave or the men are at the front lines. I mean, there's a clear a need for resources and training and all kinds. And there we have a number of EU-funded projects that already exist, and we'll be looking at seeing, whether and how to continue these projects, come up with new or different ones. But an important thing I think I'd like to highlight here, because I didn't really get a chance to talk about donor coordination.
Yes.
So there is a multi-agency donor coordination process where we are discussing very actively and regularly with all of the G 37 donors, and actually very recently there was an expansion to include new members of this donor coordination platform. So we're precisely discussing these kinds of issues. And linked to that, there is a group that is discussing with the international financial institutions that support Ukraine. And we are precisely discussing, among other things, issues linked to how do we make sure that all the let's say, the resources and support that is going to be provided in the coming period does not lead to precisely that problem. Like, how are we going to avoid that once those projects eventually come to a close, we hope in the best possible circumstances, that, you know, we don't just pull out and leave a situation where, you know, the administration is not really able to then cope with the rest. So I think, you know, we're aware of it. We're putting together different programs and projects to support, and I think those discussions will just continue in light of the plan and other needs. And then to respond to the colleague from the External Action Service, how, you know, in a way the Ukraine facility related payments linked to delivery of reforms and investments set out in the plan. So these are the conditions essentially attached to our support under the first pillar of the Ukraine facility, will not somehow, how it will not upset, in a sense, the accession process. I think the fact is that the reforms that we're talking about in relation to payments under the Ukraine facility are not a duplication of something that is going to be linked to we've been very careful in making sure that we're identifying things that are not in conflict or contradiction or somehow overlapping in a way with obligations linked to the accession process. So there, I think we can assure that there's not going to be any potential problem in that regard. Without going into lots of details here, but I think that I don't know whether I've missed anything. The balance across the whole of the EU territory, the territory of Ukraine in relation to investments. I think here this has been, if you read the Ukraine facility, there is some mention of the fact that it's going to be important that we, you know, take into account these considerations. We are looking at how, in the context of the second pillar of the Ukraine investment framework, the sort of strategic guidance that we're developing integrates these concerns as well, so that, you know, we don't end up in a situation where all the investments will end up more sort of in a lopsided way in the country. But of course, it is also true that, I mean, we need to see what is going to be possible where. So, and also another thing I want to mention in that regard is that the government of Ukraine will be represented in the steering board of that Ukraine investment framework. And so we're also counting on the representatives of the government to play a role in that sense as well, and in making sure that sort of the investments that are being proposed are, that there's a good coverage, and that we're sure that we're not sort of leaving out sort of very important regions or places or types of investments. So thank you.
Thank you. Alia?
Yeah, I would like probably to say a few words on the Russian assets issue, because that's a very big and big, I guess, elephant in the room, and it has already, like the discussion at the moment has started only recently, which I actually fully support, and I'm glad that it has started. Well, what is also good that it's still not decided, because I'm not sure that including this proceeds into the EU facility is the best decision, because the EU facility comes first with the conditionalities, which I'm not sure should be the case when confiscating Russian assets as the way to make Russia pay for the aggression and to support Ukraine. Second, could not be used for the military purposes, as far as I understand. So that again brings us to the issue of how to fund the military effort of Ukraine, for which we need money. And the third, probably, I guess these 2 points are already now. So maybe the addition to European peace facility specifically targeted on Ukraine might be also the issue on the table.
Tina.
Sure.
Starting also the order of the questions, there was a question about the programs, whether we know the programs that work particularly in boosting the capacity of human resources. Every time I read any report, what has been done in Ukraine has a component that says the World Bank or the United Nations or the EU programs helped, upscaling some training or humanitarian aid or the aiding the people locally. So it comes up a lot, these programs. Whether I know one big program with a large budget that brings those efforts together to have a systemic approach, I don't know. So that's just to answer your questions. So maybe this is also an answer that Ukraine needs to really approach this systematically together with the partners to bring together all those projects and upscale the efforts towards that. Another one was also Kinga's questions and comments that I think bringing up the salary is something that always comes up whenever I talk to Ukrainian experts, people who know how their country works. The salary difference is just drastic and it really drains the human capital, as you mentioned. So on top of those programs, I think upgrading salaries that definitely will tackle the problem. Although the country at work currently, how this is visible, this is not visible right now. So there needs to be more financial support so that Ukraine can actually do that. And another very pertinent comments again from Kinga on the use of pros and assets. I very much agree with you, Kinga, that there is indeed, legalistic solutions you can find. Economically, it's not going to be the burdensome, as you said, for the US dollar. It's really a matter of a political will, frankly. Also, what I would foresee another scenario that we are considering, the Ukraine part is considering more seriously using these funds is to what extent and what scale the international support is depleted. For instance, if the new US package just fails, if there are no sufficient resources for the military support, I think then this really becomes the priority. How can we make use of it and make use of it now? I think these are the things I wanted to mention. And the last point, and also my concluding remark, is very important thing that Natalie has mentioned about really looking forward what comes after this MFF, right? This was and this is just one point. Highlighting how much homework EU has to do itself within the European Union and just really rethink and strategize how are we going to deal with consequences of this war and the Ukraine succession and the enlargement in general. This Ukraine facility is we will stand there until 2027, but then, the time passes fast and there should be the strategy. How do we reform the EU budget and other EU policies so that EU itself becomes ready for the next enlargement and is able to support Ukraine recovery? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chichos.
I'm afraid there was more question.
If you have some
But I would say that answer is not directly on your question about the integration of refugees. We are preparing and working on that project of reform of the vocational education system of Ukraine. We spent about 2 years to prepare and take part in the joint action of Germany, Finland, Estonia, and Poland. And we hope this should be prolonged for a period necessary to prepare the system of education for the refugees and also for the changes of the Ukrainian economy facing the war, of course.
Thanks. We deserve now a coffee break. Thank you. Thanks for very productive panel. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Okay, so I will be chairing this very important panel on military assistance to Ukraine, but also the future of EU and European defense capabilities. Since the war, it's been already discussed a bit, but since the war, we see that EU assistance to Ukraine has been unprecedented in both its scale and speed. However, more needs to be done and needs are continuing, if not accelerating. So Europeans must prepare for increased investments in support of Ukraine, but also in their efforts to bolster their own capabilities. We will be discussing some of these issues with a very great panel of speakers. I will introduce them. First, on my right, we have Alexandra Koziol. She's a senior analyst working on European security with the Polish Institute for International Affairs. She's also contributed a chapter to the report that is being launched today. Then we have Amanda Paul. She is the deputy head of Europe in the World Program at the European Policy Center. She is an expert on Turkish foreign policy, Ukraine security in the Black Sea region, Russian foreign policy, and EU and Eastern neighborhood. Then we have Mark Thijs. He's a senior associate fellow with Egmont. He also is a retired lieutenant general who served for many years at the Belgian Defense, including as the vice chief of defense. And then we have Bart. Sorry. He is a visiting senior fellow with the German Marshall Fund here in Brussels. His research focused on international order, transatlantic relations, the EU, Ukraine, and Russia. Now, we have this time again 2 rounds of questions for each of the panelists. The first focuses on EU support for the war in Ukraine and broader implications for the EU security policy, and the second on European broader policy towards Russia. And then we finish with a quick round of questions. So starting with the first, I would like Alexander to kick off the discussion with an overview of how the war has affected the EU security and defense policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. And since I'm the first one to start the panel, let me start on a positive note, because I think that in general we have done well. And it is worth repeating that we have been able to respond so well thanks to EU instruments. And what we have put in place and what we have achieved so far, I think it's fair enough to say that this is unprecedented. Looking at European Peace Facility and bringing all EU member states on board and preserving unity when it comes to reaction. Then thinking about acts as ASAP and the DIRPAG, so common actions in procurement and production, again, and facilitating cooperation between member states and helping them to take joint actions. Then EU missions, military mission, training thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. Also a civilian mission that is working there on the ground in a war-torn country, hundreds of people helping to build structural resilience of Ukraine. And last but not least, satellite center, sharing intelligence information with our partner that is Ukraine. So overall, I would say that we have succeeded in our response to the crisis, but we are now faced with the need to develop a strategic response to the challenge of war and Russia's aggressive policy. So internally, the EU has provided us with a first step that is incentive to build our defense capabilities in the form of a new industrial strategy. And this is necessary not only to continue our support for Ukraine, but also to effectively deter Russia. And my research shows, as I paint in my chapter, that if we take actions under EU umbrella, we get more powerful message. And this also helps us to distribute burdens more equally within the Union. And I would say that it is the consistency of our response that determines our strength and our ability to be a reliable partner, not only in Europe, obviously we are mostly focused on that, but also globally. Global South is watching. So yeah, I meant to be positive on my first remarks, so I'll end here and I'm looking forward to
Stop here.
further discussion.
Well,
Sorry.
Well, I'm not sure we're looking forward then to your next round of remarks. Bart, as Alexander already briefly mentioned, increasing industrial capacity is at the heart of European support for Ukraine, but also broader deterrence and military reinforcement effort. How do you see the potential of this recently launched defense industrial strategy? And is there anything that could be done to increase our production in the coming months?
Great, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'll also start on the positive note, and maybe just underscore that it is great that the Commission and the EU at large are focused on developing a defense industrial strategy, focused on building up the defense and technological industrial base. Both actually sectors are quite important. The sort of traditional, tanks, ammunition, planes, and missile sectors, but also the technology sector that develops drones, interesting applications of AI and other technological tools to be able to better deploy military material on the battlefield. And it's perfectly right that the EU is taking the lead on this and is looking for ways to identify efficiencies, to do things at scale, to make sure that you have supporting financial structures to develop the industrial base in Europe itself, and to associate some money with it. The monies that are released as part of this new strategy are somewhat limited. It's 1.5 billion over the next 2 years, but nonetheless, it's a good first step. Let me maybe point out one other argument, which I think is sometimes lost in the overall debate, that much of the action of the real spending and of the real decisions, what to spend on and how to deploy it and so forth, is going to still take place at the national level in Berlin, Paris, Warsaw, Madrid, Rome. And I mentioned these 5 EU member state capitals because that is where something like 70% of overall EU defense spending takes place. And that's where you're going to really get movement, if at all, that will help improve overall European capabilities and overall European security. And I don't want to lose sight of that, because sometimes, you hear that there's an EU defense industrial strategy, and that's sort of the end of the game, because the Commission or the EAS or the EDA will take care of it. And that's absolutely not the case. The capitals are still going to be in the driver's seats on this issue for the foreseeable future. Now, here's where I see the main kind of value added of EU action beyond the strategic documents, sort of thinking through how to coordinate everyone. One is to provide additional financing. And a number of people have already mentioned this: Commissioner Breton, a member of the European Parliament, Nathalie Loiseau, and others. I suggested it a year and a half ago in an article in Foreign Policy, which is to have a big statement, big allocation of new EU funding for purposes of European defense, something like 100 billion euro. Now, it might seem a little outrageous because we're negotiating. I suggested this a year and a half ago when the member states were negotiating a 2 billion increase for the European peace facility to be able to spend on Ukraine. And at that point, people told me, this is crazy, we can't hardly approve 2 billion, however, we gotta get 100 billion. Well, now people are coming around to this idea, and you have, more than my proposal, more senior endorsement of the idea. And look, it doesn't have to be spent this year. The Zeitenwende declaration from Chancellor Scholz also was not monies allocated in 2022 and spent in 2022. It was more of a political declaration and signal to spend over a course of time. And so this is a similar idea. And the EU leaders could do this without necessarily allocating all of 100 billion right now. But I think that there should be that commitment. And in the end, that money would be used by individual member states, right? Poland, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and others, not necessarily at the EU level. And then second, and this is also sometimes overlooked in terms of the very important role of the EU, the EU at its heart is a masterful regulatory architecture, right? That's at its core what the EU does the best. And so as part of this regulatory activity, it's very important to keep in mind, what is the impact on defense production? What is the impact on security provision? What is the impact on developing a technological edge over the long term that will enable you to, produce the best drones, to produce the best AI, to produce the best whatever technology you need to be able to, let's say, decrypt Russian communications, or to make sure that your own communications are secure, or, other applications of technology. These sorts of things should be sort of on a greater, kind of higher on the policy agenda of EU regulators as they are thinking through individual legislative files. Let me pause here.
Great. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. Now I would like to turn to Mark, because you have also worked on the European Defence Industrial Strategy and on ammunition and equipment issues for much longer in your career. So I wanted to ask you to zoom further in on these issues, and perhaps also touch a bit on NATO and EU cooperation when it comes to equipment in a broader sense. Thanks.
So I'll start on a less positive note, maybe, to make a little change. When the second phase of the war, because the war is already 10 years ongoing, when the second phase of the war started, I said we have 5 to 7 years to get our act together. And 2 years later, I would say, well, maybe we lost 2 years. In the sense that I think from a technical point of view, I have about 25 years in equipment management and projects. I think one extremely underestimated the time needed actually to get production lines ready again. The example here in Belgium, we're starting up with the Kanyes Belgium 155mm production line. First, you must have the equipment for a production line. It will take 2 years to get the people trained on the production line, and then another year to train them how to fill the ammunition with TNT. So we talk about 3 years simply for an ammunition production line. And that's the top of the iceberg. It's 155mm, and as spoken this morning, it's not only about it's 155mm. That's the top of the iceberg. It's everything. Ukraine's everything. And Europe and even the US actually is not equipped today to have sufficient stocks themselves and to give sufficient ammunition to Ukraine. So I think we lost a couple of years, unfortunately. I think the plan that came out last week has the right accents. But as already said, 1.5 million is not even in the vicinity of the order of magnitude that is needed. And that's only ammunition, and that's only defense. If we talk military mobility, there we spent 1.7 billion, I think, last year, which is the most, I think, popular PESCO project at this moment. It's not even in the order of magnitude what is needed either. There you also have to also speak about 100 billion needed simply to get your troops from the harbors, Antwerp, Rotterdam, to the Belarusian and Russian borders. Even there, so the order of magnitude what is needed and what's lying before us as a union is enormous. And of course, when you talk about NATO-EU cooperation, since last week, 23 members of NATO are also EU members, so it's going up. So there's a lot of cooperation. I think from an operational point of view, well, we are training since more than 70 years together, so I don't think the biggest problem is there. But it's getting actually on how can we be stronger? And I don't believe actually that it's the top-down approach will work, whatever. And that's, well, as a Belgian, which is together with the Netherlands a bit the benchmark, with the Benelux, a bit of the benchmark of military cooperation, I'm a strong believer in bottom-up cooperation, like you see in the Visegrad countries, like you see in the Scandinavian countries, like we see with the Benelux, what we see around F-16 and F-35 in the future. So it has to be very pragmatic, and any policy that's imposed top down, I think there the capitals will say that won't work. I'll stop here.
Thank you. And we'll now turn to Amanda. We've heard already also on the previous panel a bit about Ukrainian needs, also military ones, and now we've also touched upon them a bit more indirectly. So I wanted to ask you if you want to look ahead at what Ukraine needs going forward, but also because you work on Black Sea security and EU-Turkey relations, maybe you can add a bit on those issues as well. Thanks.
Yeah, sure, thank you. I feel very depressed after your comments.
Most people do.
I mean, European security depends on Ukrainian security. So when I make an assessment of how I feel about the EU's response to the war in Ukraine, to be honest, I agree with what has already been said, that what was done is good, but the fact is it's not good enough. It wasn't good enough to start with. Military support was too slow, and it wasn't enough. Of course, there were some member states, including Poland, that have done everything they could, more or less, and the Baltics. But for many other countries, that hasn't been the case, and this has been extremely costly for Ukraine, first and foremost, but it actually led to this terrible war being dragged out. That's my negative comments. Now I try to be a bit more positive. I mean, there seems to have been an awakening now within the EU. Again, unfortunately, this has been caused by the terrible situation on the battlefield in Ukraine on the one hand, and on the other, the unfortunate situation in the United States. There's now a realization that things aren't going as we thought they might, and the EU needs to do something. And we can definitely see in the last a couple of months there has been a shake-up of some of the thinking, some of the statements from those countries that were very cautious before. I mean, first and foremost, I want to mention France here. Mr. Macron seems to now position himself as a leader of the bunch of countries that wants to, you know, get more military assistance to Ukraine and to do away with the whole red line, although he was one of the leaders of the red line. He made a very important speech. I think it was yesterday night on the television in France. This is really good because it would have reached the population of France, and he made some very clear messaging. And this is what all EU member states need to be doing. I want to see all heads of state giving that sort of big television presentation at prime time, 8 o'clock in the evening. Let's do it. Let's make European citizens really understand the truth, because they don't. Many citizens still believe this war has got nothing to do with them. It's in Ukraine, a country that's far away, and it's never going to spill over. This is not true. I mean, I'm sure many of you listened to President Putin's manifesto speech a couple of weeks ago about the elections that will be taking place this weekend. And the guy is smug. I mean, he's very smug. He still believes that Russia is going to win. This is his narrative. He believes it. And honestly, if we do not, as the EU, seriously step up, there is a chance that some of his objectives could be achieved. I agree with the two previous speakers, or three, about the situation in the production of arms. This is a tragedy that we're in this situation, but there's still stuff that can be sent to Ukraine, that Ukraine needs. Everything should be sent to Ukraine that we have in our warehouses, and most importantly, those weapons that Ukraine has been asking for since 2 years, long-range missiles and whatnot. We know what they are. They're listed time and time again. These can be sent. It saddens me greatly that, again, Chancellor Scholz yesterday or the day before reiterated that Ukraine won't get Taurus missiles. This has to change. They need to get these weapons, and they need them as soon as possible. And just one word on the Black Sea, because I know I'm violating my time here. Ukraine has done marvelous things in the Black Sea, and it's done it by itself, because again, there was a resistance from some allies to actually supply Ukraine or help Ukraine in the Black Sea because they were scared of a possible Russian escalation. I mean, we need to get over this being scared of a Russian escalation. So as was earlier said, I mean, a large part of Russia's Black Sea fleet has been destroyed. I mean, Russia no longer has the ability to move around freely in the Black Sea. This is a major achievement by Ukraine. And this can be built on again if it receives key weapons that it needs. It was Ukraine that was able to establish this new humanitarian grain corridor along the coast of Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey. And also these three countries have also played an important role. The coalition that they created to get rid of landmines is functioning, and it's also helping Ukraine. The Montreal Convention, of course, prevents Russian vessels from getting into the sea, and Russia's ability to actually attack Ukraine in the sea has been diminished, first of all because of Ukraine's actions, but also because of the allies in the air. I mean, NATO member states still have a significant amount of air superiority, if that's the right terminology, over the Black Sea. So I think these are important steps, but more can be done. And again, it comes back to being brave. If the Kerch Strait Bridge is struck and demolished, this will be a game changer for Ukraine. And the West is able to provide Ukraine with the missiles to do that, but at the moment they just won't. This needs to be reflected on, and this needs to be reversed. The same for Crimea. Ukraine has given or delivered some very heavy attacks on Crimea, on key Russian infrastructure there, including on the Black Sea ports. I believe Ukraine can liberate Crimea. It has to liberate Crimea. It has to liberate the Black Sea because this coast needs to be available for Ukraine to continue to deliver and export grain and whatnot. So much more can be done despite, let's say, the restrictions that you mentioned. More can be done and needs to be done. Sorry if I was too long.
Only a bit, but it was very interesting. So we'll move to the next round, because as the report highlights, the EU's credibility as a security actor will also depend on its ability to develop a broader coherent policy towards Russia, or beyond just Ukraine. So we will try and have a discussion on that in the second round, and I want to ask Alexandra to kick off again by highlighting or analyzing what you see as the key bottlenecks to this. Thanks.
Well, now I'm going to turn pessimistic, and I would say that we did not lose 2 years. We lost 15 years at least. So the only language that Russia understands is the language of power. And the way we can achieve this is through our unity in action, on the one hand, but also on the other hand in communication. And we ensured unity in our support to Ukraine so far, but our policy is really to restore not only peace in Ukraine, but also security in Europe in a broader sense, has to be something more. And one point is to understand that whatever the outcome of the war would be, our relations with future Russia will be difficult, and we have to prepare for that already now. And one obvious thing is uncertainty of the future regime in Russia. Would it be Putin Russia? Would it be post-Putin Russia? Would the change be for better or for worse? It doesn't matter, but it still will be a huge challenge. And the deeper problem, I think, that has been highly underestimated is the growing militarization. And I would just refer here to Ian Gardner and his latest book, Generation Z. If we want to make sure that Russia does not use war as a final argument again, we have to prepare ourselves for decades of work, not only with the state, but also with the society that has been first affected by war, that has been living in a totalitarian regime for decades and has been facing a systemic violence that we in Europe have not experienced for years. And we will have to challenge this, working with the state and with the society, and it will be decades. The second issue is engagement with our eastern neighbors, because if we do not secure them, we will be at risk too. And let's just take a look geographically. First of all, at Russian influence in Moldova, and I'm not only saying about Transnistria, I'm also saying about the independent state. Then instability in South Caucasus, given the situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan that is still unresolved. The Azerbaijan regime still raises up the issue of the Zangezur corridor towards Nakhichevan. So the EU is present in Armenia, but I think the border monitoring is, the least that we could have done in this situation. And let's not forget that still 20% of Georgian territory is occupied by Russian forces. So obviously, Ukraine is in the center of our focus and certainly should be in the center. But to win strategically with Russia, we have to be more proactive and decisive in our actions towards the east. Because the only language, as I said at the very beginning, that Russia understands is when we are unanimous and strong. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting, the way you highlighted our need to forge a broader policy also to the beyond Ukraine towards the east. Bart, would you also mind adding a few words about what Europe or the EU can do as a part of a broader containment strategy towards Russia beyond just the military domain? Thanks.
Sounds good. And let me pick up on some of the threads that were mentioned by my co-panelists. I very much appreciate the change in President Macron's rhetoric. But in many ways, leadership is earned, it's not declared. And so I would also very much welcome a shift in his policies, namely, how much in practice of weapons do you provide to Ukraine? And France is sort of near the bottom of the list of EU member states. How many troops do you have from your own country reinforcing the eastern flank of NATO? And again, France, I think, has, the latest time I looked, something like 1,000 soldiers, which is not to the fullest of its potential, nor is it, commensurate with the contributions of other member states and other matters as well. So I think, hopefully the actions and the policies will follow the rhetoric, but time will tell, I suppose. One area, as part of this overall, thinking about long-term containment strategy of Russia, because I agree that regardless of how things go the next 12 months, 2 years, however many years, is going to be, a challenge. Hopefully, maybe one sort of optimistic scenario, to return to our positive outlooks, could be sort of like a Yeltsin Russia, not a super functional country, but not a threatening country, a country that, is not waging aggressive wars, is not threatening its neighbors. I understand that this is sort of a far off dream, but we've been there at some point, so maybe we could get there at another stage. But until we get to that ideal state, I agree that there will be, sort of a containment campaign. And part of that containment campaign isn't only the military measures that we discussed already, but also, a clever economic campaign against Russia. And we've had 12 rounds of sanctions thus far. To be frank, I think the hope was that these sanctions would have a greater impact on the Russian economy. Initially, it seemed like there was an impact, but the Russian economy has rebounded as it's found markets in other parts of the world. So, there's more work to be done there. But one big issue, which is fully within, and this was discussed in the previous panel, but let me expound a little bit, fully within the discretion of the EU is the question of what to do with Russian state assets. And there, President Macron could also play a major leadership role because he, alongside Germany and Italy, have been part of the G7 discussions and obviously the Council discussions on this issue. Now, let me just maybe take 2 minutes because in my day job, I'm also a lawyer, so I've been sort of very close to this particular issue and could help sort through some of the debates that have been circling around thus far. So on the profits themselves, right, there is basically no complex legal questions to address, no economic risks to address. The position of Belgium, as well as now of the Council of the EU and of Euroclear, is that these profits are the property of Euroclear. We can get into why, but essentially it is because of Belgian national law and the fact that these things are governed by contracts, which are normally very short-term contracts, 24, 48 hours, something like this, and these things have lapsed. So in the absence of contracts with the Central Bank of Russia, these profits revert to Euroclear. Now, legally, obviously, politically and morally, this money belongs to Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. And Belgium should have imposed a windfall tax on these profits back in 2022, should have done so back in 2023. The virtue of a windfall tax of about 90 to 95% is that it's also fully consistent with EU law, so we can do it. And Belgium could have done this a long time ago. Unfortunately, Belgium actually has slow-rolled discussions in the Council of the EU to this year, to then make the argument that, by the way, we cannot now go retroactively and tax these profits for the past 2 years. And by the way, it's 5 billion in profits. It's huge. It's a huge amount of money that Belgium is saying, no, this is private property of Europe and our tax revenues for Belgium itself. And even now, as the presidency of the Council of the EU, Belgium has been canceling working groups of the relevant, or meetings of the relevant working group to discuss this. And even now, even though there was a decision, a political decision of the Council back in January to immobilize these state assets, there's in fact not a legally binding text that has been approved by the Council. And, let me just show this as a lawyer. It's really important to know what is actually in the details of the text before you opine, whether it's a step forward or not. So anyway, on all this, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, other European leaders have full discretion to move on this because, again, no complicated legal questions. You could impose a windfall tax, should have done this 2 years ago, a year ago. And, it's easy. It's just a paper exercise. It's not producing 155 millimeter ammunition where you need the equipment, you need the people to trade on the equipment, it takes time, right? So I get the production constraints that are just difficult to overcome by snapping your finger. But here, this could have been done a long time ago. On the assets themselves, let me just take 2 seconds on this. There are some international legal questions around what you could do with the assets. By now, the center of gravity of international expert opinion is you can seize them on the basis of what are known countermeasures, which is basically if you, Russia, violate international law, we, the EU, Belgium, can suspend our obligations to you as a way of compelling you to stop violating international law, meaning getting out of Ukraine, get your forces out, and pay reparations to Ukraine to 400 billion euro, now growing every month, every year. And so that's the logic, and it's a logic that's well grounded in international law and well accepted by international lawyers. But it hasn't been accepted yet by Berlin and by Paris, who are holding up movement on this issue in the G7, who are holding up also movement on this issue at the Council of the EU. And again, this is something that it's a paper exercise. You draft the Council decision, you sign off on the Council decision, you direct Euroclear to seize these assets and direct it to a Ukraine fund for payments to Ukraine and Ukrainian claimants. And it's fully within the EU's strategic autonomy, power, discretion, however way you want to put it. And it's where President Macron and Chancellor Scholz could lead.
Great, thanks. That was really good. I would like now to shift to another part of a broader strategy towards Russia, which is how do we counter within the EU and in Europe Russian narratives, Russian information operations. We've seen these for years, but also currently in the war, they are being employed also to undermine European support for the war effort. So, Amanda, tell us a bit what can be done to counter, to better counter narratives. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. If you don't mind, I just want to say one word about the Russian elections. Because I think it's really important that the EU and others have a very robust response to these elections, not just come up with another slogan saying the elections were, not free and fair. We need to go beyond that, and it should be part of our new approach towards Russia. I mean, for example, I would suggest that sanctions are placed on everybody who's actually involved in organising the elections, whether it's the people at the ballot boxes to all officials. I mean, that's a lot of people, but I mean, why not? You can't sanction enough Russians, but it needs to be more than what our normal response is. And if there's anything we can do within the UN to expel Russia again from different bodies there, I think that should be looked into because it's important. As you mentioned, Moldova, I mean, the Russians have set up monitoring, election stations in Moldova, in occupying Transnistria, but also in Moldova proper. When it comes to disinformation, I mean, this is still a major challenge for Europe. I mean, in the EPC, we had a recent publication that looked at Russian disinformation in Italy, Germany, and Bulgaria ahead of the European Parliament elections, which showed that there's still huge amounts of disinformation circulating, I mean, including vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine, which is shaping people's minds. Three of the recommendations that we had, first of all, to have a comprehensive strategy that goes beyond the usual national approaches. There needs to be a more EU-focused strategy in that respect, to have a more robust enforcement of regulatory measures adopted at the EU level. For example, like the Digital Services Act, because the way that digital tools are now used to spread disinformation and artificial intelligence is extremely challenging. So these sorts of legislation need to be effectively implemented. An adaptive approach that anticipates and effectively responds to emerging threats, for example, like pre-bunking some of the narratives. And the last one is related to media literacy. This needs to be enhanced. I mean, media literacy is a crucial tool. So to promote media literacy through education will help promote more critical thinking and an ability for people, particularly the younger generation, to better understand whether something is disinformation or not. I mean, probably some of these ideas are too late in coming ahead of the European Parliament elections, because as we already heard from another speaker, this disinformation is certainly going to impact the way some people vote, unfortunately.
Thank you. And I would like to shift now to Mark with a related question. That is, what I found very interesting, also what you said, okay, so I'm realizing it's not a very optimistic note to end on, but we have to talk a bit about European fatigue. And Amanda, during the first round, said the European public still thinks this war has nothing to do with them. So I want to turn to Mark with a question of how current public thinking regarding the war, where it's currently at, and maybe to end with a bit more positive note, what can we do about it?
How about it? Actually, there was a question in the previous panel on it, actually, what you see with the upcoming European elections, which is one of the milestones we have in the upcoming year, I think, years for our possible futures. We've seen, Hungary, we know what happened in Slovakia, we see in the Netherlands, the PVV, who's got a large majority. I see my own country in Belgium, the extremes are gaining ground. And these are political parties, and you see it in many European countries with the upcoming European elections. And these are kind of parties who are more positive towards autocratic regimes, whether it's Chinese or Russian or whatever. And actually, if you look to our center of gravity as a union or as an alliance, it's saying it's solidarity. It's strong together. And what they try to target actually is our solidarity. They try to, it's easier to, when you have to eat a big cake, it's easier to eat it in small parts, one at a time. And a deunified Europe, a deunified alliance, that's a lot easier to get it into the sphere of influence of Russia. Because in the end, military victory is not, it's a mean to an end. The end is a political victory. And a political victory is a European continent that's under the influence, political influence of the Russian Federation. So how can we counter it? Well, if we talk about, I think there are different lines of effort that are ongoing. There's the military one, which is a very visible one. And I think the only option there is that we, and it's not only Ukraine, we as Europeans, we must win. That's the only option we have. If you look at the economic one, sanctions. So there we have to impose and be more stringent about it. I saw yesterday in the Belgian newspaper on a balloon company who was working with Russian steel, still importing it. The export of German equipment through the Scheldt going up to 4,000% at certain moments. So that's the economic line of effort. And then there's, I think, the information warfare. And maybe that's from a political point of view, the most important one. We are only talking about the defensive part of the information warfare. How can we be more literate? I think we have to go on the offensive. It's an information war that we have to win for our populations. And well, I started my career during the Cold War. My first assignment was in a German border with the Russians on the Volkswagen side and 50 meters on the other side. So I did my patrols there. And as he said, we said, well, the only language the Russians understand is a punch in the face and a kick in the butt. And so I think that's the case. But actually, if we want to create that black swan somewhere in the Kremlin in the upcoming years, but in the end, that's what we want, another kind of Russia, well, then we must win the information warfare. And we must learn ourselves how can we go into the offensive in information warfare.
Well, thanks for this. I think it was a lot to take in. I would love to turn to the audience now, and I guess we collect a couple of questions.
Hello, thank you very much for panelists. My name is Grzegorz Krzyżanowski. I work at the European Parliament for the Polish MEPs. I have a question which it summarizes what all you all said during the panel, and it relates to creating the credible deterrence strategy and strategic posture of the European Union. So my question is, what about the lack of such strategic culture in the European Union, or do you think that is something which we are now seeing being developed? And speaking about this credible deterrence and issue of the possibility of the French leadership, and a question about the you have plenty of data, plenty of knowledge about how the deterrence worked in the past or didn't work in the past. So the question is, what about the potential of the French leadership in the military aspects of the European Union, about this French being the only nation having the actual nuclear capacity in the European Union, and about possible implication for the relation with the other member states, which have more like, I mean, neutral or openly against having the nuclear capacities located on their territories. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am Sri Shankar, representing the mission of Ukraine to the European Union. First of all, I would like to say, as a military, I would like to say thank you to all nations of European Union itself, and our, in particular, Polish friends for their comprehensive support providing to our country in this fight. I would like to just maybe make one clarification in terms of this frozen Russian assets issue. We heard from the President of European Commission and also HRVP Borrell also mentioned that the possibility of to engage the profits of this frozen assets, as you mentioned, it's about 5 billion, for example, to address the immediate military needs of armed forces of Ukraine. So I would appreciate for your comments. Thank you.
Hello, hi. My name is Peter. I work in Free Russia Foundation. I heard many comments on the point that the EU citizens literally can't understand the situation in Ukraine and why is the EU citizens' responsibility to fight for Ukraine, to defend Ukraine, because that's the interest of the EU first of all. Maybe because the European Union need to change the perception of who is Vladimir Putin, that he's not the politician, because usually the EU citizens are seen like, or Putin is politician, we need to talk with him, we need to negotiate with him, we need to find what's his particular political ideology. And of course, that's why the perception for the EU citizens about who is Mr. Putin and his regime is a bit different in this regard. So that's why they can't understand why we need to protect Ukraine, because Putin's Russia can invade the EU afterwards. We need to change our attitude from my point of view, and the EU citizen as well. I think we need to talk directly to the EU citizens, so to say that he's a gangster, he's not a politician, he doesn't have any political vision, and that's why we shouldn't negotiate with him. Thank you.
Actually, Agata from PISM. I'm not a security expert, but I wanted to ask you if EU can do something more in terms of supporting Ukraine weapon production in Ukraine. And also, I would like to comment on sanctions, because I'm working in this field, and both speakers refer to this topic. We should have a clarity that sanctions, EU sanctions, are working, but maybe not to the extent we wanted. But if we see the data, I mean, last year, because of the EU oil embargo and because of price cap, the revenues, Russian revenues from sales of oil, but also and gas, because of the countermeasures, has declined, and they are at lower level than the average 10 years before invasion. So I mean, if the sanctions are working, and there are two fields, a very important one for the EU is to further adopt the sanctions in the energy fields, because still it is a revenue for Russian budget. Last year, the EU imported Russian fossil fuels worth around 28 billion of euros. And also the EU imported the refined petroleum products from Russian oil worth around more than 2 billion of euros. So this is one area of sanctions where they can be strengthened. And the second one are dual-used components. We all perfectly know that the components, EU ones, reach Russian territory, and there is more job to do with our own companies.
Thank you. Okay, maybe you, yeah, the last one.
Hi, my name is Keynote. I have a question to do more with innovation. I know we obviously have issues with production. That's something that we're going to struggle for the next 4 years. But how can we support Ukraine in terms of battlefield innovation we can't outproduce Russia, maybe we can have a technological advantage to where that capability won't be that much different. How can we support them in this regard, for example, in electronic warfare to protect against kamikaze drones? Yeah, that's my question.
Great, thanks. We've got a broad variety of questions, and we have about 1.5 minutes per panelist to address them, so you can cherry pick. And I propose to start with Bart and then work this way.
Great, thanks. I'll speak very, very quickly on the profits, 5 billion profits. You know, this is for 2022 and 2023. The position of Belgium, and as I understand of the EU right now, is that these profits are not on the table. And this was Belgium's strategy. Thank you. I think Belgium should be still morally and politically obliged to hand over that 5 billion to Ukraine. It's preposterous that you know, this money will reside in private pockets because these assets would have never been at Euroclear in the first place. Rather than spending time here, let me just refer you to a great op-ed by a member of the European Parliament, Virginia Shimoshevich, from late January of this year in Politico, which lays out all of this. And what, you know, these funds will be paid for, then, you know, it's a decision for the EU. In terms of the strategic culture in Europe, look, I think, you know, generally it's okay, especially in Paris. The French government has a very good strategic culture. Sometimes you might disagree with the strategy, but, you know, they have thought things through and they have their priorities, they have their objectives and resources and so forth. That's the case for Poland as well. You know, in coalition governments where you have to negotiate among 3 or 4 different parties who have different worldviews and different foreign policy directions, it's more tricky. But I don't think the issue is about strategic culture, but just about the you know, material they have, the capabilities they have at your disposal, because that gives you more options. And some of it is just the sheer scale. And that would be my main call, you know, just bulk up the scale. Forget about efficiencies and duplication and overlap where the focus has been. Just build up the scale, even if there's a little bit of inefficiency. Build it up in Paris, build it up in Berlin, Warsaw, Rome, and in Madrid, and elsewhere as well, ground up. And once you have those capabilities, then you can deploy them. On innovation, I think we just have a lot to learn from the Ukrainians, actually, more so than offer lessons. My plea was for, you know, the high-end tech stuff that's being developed right now. Give it room to play and don't overregulate it. Make sure that, you know, we don't sort of self-constrain and we have a long-term competitive advantage over all adversaries, not only Russia, but also China.
I'm the second one. Also on power, actually, I wrote an article on it on Egmont Institute 3 weeks ago. So I got invited by 5 ambassadors to speak on it at 13:30. So I think there's a great difference in speed if you look to Europe. If I look to our eastern member states, the Scandinavians, and the Baltics, I see ambition. And I see, and France is also because of their nuclear sense and their nuclear capability. I see they know what the power of instruments are, and they know how to, and they understand the need to use them. If I look to, and I call it old Europe, which is where I'm from actually, the Benelux and other countries. Well, we still think that security is a given. It comes from God, and it will always be there. And as long as we don't change that perception, well, we're not able to use the powers of instruments as they are, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. We don't integrate them in a very effective way. And that's something we have to do. On innovation, I think Europeans can learn a lot of Ukrainians from innovation. I think we have to go to Ukraine to learn from them. But in the end, I know there is certain support, also technological support towards Ukraine. But at this moment, I think we can learn more from them, from our Ukrainian friends that they can sometimes learn from us.
On the question of strategic culture, I think the EU still really struggles with this. I mean, I consider the EU to be still very reactive, rather than having, let's say, strategic vision on specific issues. Perhaps I can give one example. I mean, given the current security situation in Europe, I mean, for me, it should be a no-brainer that those countries that currently block EU-Turkey defence and security cooperation stop blocking it. Turkey is already one of the biggest presence on the eastern flank. I mean, they recently led the new battalion in Hungary, but they're all down the eastern flank and the southern flank. So for me, it should be a strategic priority, given the security threats we're all facing, that this cooperation would go ahead. But here's hoping. When it comes to the potential leadership of President Macron, I mean, as a British person, perhaps I shouldn't be answering that. To be honest, I mean, for me, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And as was mentioned before by you, I really want to see whether Macron actually follows through on some of the big statements that he has been making, because as you rightly said as well, France's contribution in terms of arms is very small. But that said, France is a major military power and does have the capacity to carry out this role. But this would also involve a very, for me, a complete evolution in French thinking when it comes to the Eastern neighborhood, when it comes to Russia, how they view future policy with Russia, how they view the end of the war, and some of these things I still have big question marks over, particularly given France's history in its involvement in other formats. I mean, the Minsk process and in the peace process in Georgia. I mean, it was the French that put together the famous 10-point plan. And so I do have a question mark. And the last comment that I will make is about the perception of the public on Russia. I think that most European citizens are savvy enough to know that Putin's a bad guy. I think it's more that the war in Ukraine has disappeared from the media, which has given the impression that things are perhaps going better than they actually are. I mean, I would encourage national broadcasters to actually have more slots in the news programs, and particularly on issues that are very close to people's hearts. I mean, the issue of kidnapped and deported children. I mean, the tens of thousands that have been kidnapped to Ukraine, justice and war crimes, and things that really show, well, touch people's hearts in terms of what's going on the ground in Ukraine, that resonate with ordinary people, and that isn't the case at the moment.
So when it comes to Yeltsin Russia, I'm sorry, but I have to refer to that. That was a country that gave us huge hopes, but then in the end helped to build the oligarchic mafia-style regime that we see now. So I would say that let's not get back to past and let's think about how we can shape a better future. When it comes to strategic culture and credible deterrence, I would say let's focus on actions and the culture will follow, because I'm fed up with asking questions about like, who are we? How should we frame ourselves? Like, let's think about reacting to what is happening now, and then we'll see what comes out of that. And when it comes to weapons and Ukraine, I would say, still are in a transition period, sort of, when it comes to providing Ukraine with ammunition. There's still a lot of that we can do, I mean, buying and sending them to Ukraine. And then obviously the longer strategic goal should be common production. And for that, we just need political will.
Great, thanks. Good way of ending. Please join me in an applause for the 4 panelists. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before everybody rushes for the truth, let me just take a few more minutes. I will give the floor to Mr. Akhvlediani, President of the Solidarity Fund. I can say a few words about the exhibition that we have in the
Thank you very much. I would like to encourage you to see the exhibition prepared by the Solidarity Fund. This exhibition presents the fate of 10 women captured by Russia, military women, Ukrainians captured by Russia, and tortured and also violated by Russians. With these histories, the histories are really moving, personal, very intimate, prepared by our foundation, which supports also women captured by Russians and freed from Russians, and also children orphaned by this tragic war. We have a special fund, Szymański fund, which has some joins Poland and Ukraine, because we can say about his parallel double Polish Ukrainian identity. He was a Greek monk in the Stadejek monastery, not far away from Lviv, supported women and children during the First World War, and we think is a guarantee that this project will go follow, will go on. So if you have time, please watch this exhibition. This is only a small part of this tragic events that take part in today.